The bill lay on my small kitchen table, a stark white rectangle against the dark, scarred wood. Vivid Link. The name itself felt like a mockery, a promise of connection to a world I could only watch through a screen. For $87.42 a month, it offered 100 channels of laughter and drama and news I didn't have the energy to care about. It was the last luxury, the final thread tying my solitary life to the vibrant, noisy planet outside my thin apartment walls. And it was a thread I had to cut. My life was a carefully curated collection of necessities. Rent for this third-floor walk-up with its rattling radiator and single window overlooking a brick wall. Power to keep the lights on and the ancient refrigerator humming. The meager grocery budget that made chicken a weekly triumph. I worked 40 hours a week at the Daily Grind, a coffee shop downtown, slinging lattes for people whose monthly cable bill was probably less than their bar tab on a Tuesday night. My hands were perpetually chapped from hot water and sanitizer, and I smelled faintly of burnt espresso beans no matter how many times I showered. After my shift, I'd come home to the quiet, make a simple meal, and maybe, if I wasn't too tired, I'd open my sketchbook. But lately, the pages remained blank. The energy required to create something from nothing was an expense I couldn't afford. The television was my companion. A 32-inch screen I'd bought secondhand, it filled the silence. It asked nothing of me. It didn't care that my dreams of being an illustrator had been ground down into the daily necessity of making rent. It just glowed, a faithful, inanimate friend in the corner of my living room. Canceling it felt like a kind of surrender, an admission that the four walls of my apartment were no longer just a home, but the full and final boundary of my world. But the math was unforgiving. $87 was 2 weeks of groceries. It was the difference between scraping by and falling behind. So I put on my best coat, the one that wasn't frayed at the cuffs, and walked the 12 blocks to the Vivid Link customer service center. I hated doing things like this over the phone. The endless menus, the transfers, the cheerful but utterly unhelpful voices reading from a script designed to wear you down until you just gave up. I preferred the finality of a face-to-face interaction. A clean, quick cut. I rehearsed the words in my head. I need to cancel my service. No, I'm not interested in a cheaper package. No, I don't want to put my account on hold. Just cancel, please. The service center was a small, sterile office in a downtown strip mall, wedged between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The air inside was thick with a low-grade tension. A handful of people were scattered in the uncomfortable plastic chairs, their faces set in masks of bored frustration. A woman with 2 restless children was arguing in a low, insistent voice with the single employee behind the counter, a young woman who looked like she was barely holding on. Her smile was a brittle, painted-on thing. I took a number, 17, and sat down. The digital sign above the counter currently displayed number 12. I settled in for a wait. The argument at the counter escalated slightly. Something about a billing error, a mistaken charge. The mother's voice grew louder, sharper. The employee's smile flickered and died. It was then that I noticed him. He was standing near the back of the room, by the water cooler, not as a customer, but as an observer. He was older than me, maybe late 40s or early 50s, dressed in a simple, dark wool coat that was impeccably tailored. It wasn't flashy, but it spoke of a quiet, confident wealth that was worlds away from my own worn-out jacket. He wasn't looking at his phone or fidgeting. He was just watching, his gaze calm and steady, taking in the scene at the counter with a look of thoughtful assessment. There was a stillness about him, an aura of authority that didn't need to announce itself. He seemed utterly out of place in this drab little office of discontent. He had graying hair at the temples, cut short and neat. A strong jawline, a straight nose. His face was handsome, but it was the expression in his eyes that held my attention. It was serious, but not unkind. Perceptive, like he could see not just the surface-level argument, but the weary frustration beneath it. He saw the mother's desperation and the employee's stress, and he wasn't judging either of them. He was simply observing, gathering information. The number on the sign clicked to 13, then 14. The time dragged. I watched the man. He never moved, just kept his quiet vigil. At one point, he met my gaze across the room. I quickly looked away, a flush of heat rising in my neck. It felt like being caught staring, though he hadn't seemed surprised or annoyed. His eyes, for the brief second they had met mine, were a cool, clear gray. They didn't dismiss me. They simply saw me. It was an unsettling feeling. Finally, the sign blinked to 17. My turn. I walked to the counter, the crumpled bill clutched in my hand. The young woman, whose name tag read Sarah, gave me a tired smile. "How can I help you today?" "Hi," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I'd like to cancel my service, please." I slid the bill across the counter. Her fingers tapped on the keyboard. The practice lines came out. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there a problem with your service? We have some new promotional packages I could tell you about." "No, thank you," I said, keeping my voice firm and polite. "The service is fine. I just can't afford it anymore. I need to cancel." The finality in my tone seemed to register. She sighed, a small puff of resignation. "Okay, I'll just need to see your ID." As I fumbled for my wallet, a low voice spoke from just behind me. "Is there an issue, Sarah?" We both looked up. It was the man in the wool coat. He had moved from the back of the room, so silently I hadn't even heard him approach. He wasn't standing too close, not crowding me, but his presence was a tangible thing. It had weight. Sarah's eyes widened. A flicker of panic, then recognition, crossed her face. "Mr. Croft, I'm so sorry, I didn't see you." "No, sir, no issue. This gentleman is just closing his account." Croft. The name echoed in my mind. Julian Croft, founder and CEO of Vivid Link. I'd seen his picture in the business section of the local paper. The man who had built a telecommunications empire from nothing. The billionaire. He was supposed to be a remote, mythical figure who lived in a glass tower downtown, not someone who stood in line at one of his own dreary service centers. He ignored her deference. His attention focused on the monitor she was looking at, then on me. His gray eyes were steady, and again, I felt that strange sensation of being truly seen. Not as a number, not as a problem, but as a person. "Reason for closing?" he asked, his voice calm and direct. It wasn't accusatory. It was a simple request for data. I felt a defensive stiffness in my spine. "It's a personal financial decision," I said, trying to match his neutral tone. He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the worn collar of my coat, then back to my face. There was no pity in his expression, only that same quiet assessment. He looked at Sarah. "Leave the account open," Sarah blinked. "Sir," and waive the next 3 months of fees for him. He continued, his voice even. He turned his full attention back to me. The office, with its flickering fluorescent lights and disgruntled customers, seemed to fade away. There was only the quiet intensity of his gaze. "There's a game on tonight. The playoffs. You shouldn't miss it." I stared at him, completely bewildered. "I what?" He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a slim, elegant wallet. From it, he produced a business card. It was thick, cream-colored stock, with nothing on it but a name, Julian Croft, and a handwritten address. No phone number, no corporate logo. Just a street address in the old, historic part of town. The part of town with gas lamps and sprawling brick mansions. He held it out to me. "Cancel nothing," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. "Come watch it from my place." 7 o'clock, the sheer, unexpected strangeness of the offer left me speechless. My mind raced, trying to find a logical reason for this. Was it a prank? A bizarre customer retention strategy? A whim of a bored billionaire? I looked from the card to his face. His expression was completely serious. There was no hint of a joke, no ulterior motive I could decipher. It was just an invitation, plain and simple. My hand moved automatically, my fingers closing around the stiff card. The paper was cool and smooth against my skin. I don't understand," I stammered. "It's just a game," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corners of his mouth. "And my television is bigger than yours." With that, he gave a slight nod, turned, and walked out of the service center, the glass doors swinging shut behind him with a soft hiss. I stood at the counter, the card in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sarah was staring at me, her mouth slightly agape. The low murmur of the waiting room had fallen silent. Everyone had heard. Everyone was looking at me. I felt a hot wave of embarrassment and confusion wash over me. Without another word, I turned and practically fled the building, the cold winter air a welcome shock against my heated face. I walked for 3 blocks before I even dared to look down at the card again. Julian Croft. An address. An invitation that made absolutely no sense at all. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. At work, I spilled a tray of drinks, gave a customer the wrong change, and burned a batch of scones. My mind wasn't on the job. It was replaying the scene at the Vivid Link office, dissecting every word, every look. Julian Croft. The man was a local legend. He'd started the company in his garage 2 decades ago and built it into a regional powerhouse. He was known for being intensely private, a bit of a recluse. He wasn't a socialite. He didn't splash his face across billboards. He was just a quiet, powerful force that shaped a significant part of our city's economy. And he had invited me, a broke barista, to his home to watch a football game. Why? The question echoed in my head, a persistent, unanswerable drumbeat. Was it pity? Had he seen my worn coat and the desperation in my attempt to cancel my last small pleasure and felt a pang of charitable guilt? The thought was mortifying. I hated being an object of pity. Or was it something else? A power play? A rich man's game? Amusing himself by plucking a random person out of obscurity for an evening? That felt even worse. Yet, his demeanor hadn't been condescending. It had been direct, matter of fact. His eyes hadn't held pity, they'd held interest, a calm, assessing curiosity. When he'd spoken, it felt less like a command and more like a simple statement of a better alternative. Don't do that. Do this instead. It was the quiet confidence of a man who was used to solving problems. My problem was $87 and a lonely night ahead. His solution was a 3-month reprieve and an invitation. By 6:30, I was a wreck of indecision. My apartment felt smaller, shabbier than ever. The old television sat in the corner, a dark, silent square. I could stay here. I could ignore the bizarre invitation, let the 3 free months run out, and then cancel for good. That was the safe, sensible thing to do. It was what someone in my position was supposed to do. You don't just go to a billionaire's house because he tells you to. But curiosity was a powerful, insidious thing. What did his house look like? What was he like when he wasn't the mythical CEO? What would we even talk about? The sheer absurdity of it all was magnetic. It was a crack in the monotonous gray wall of my life. A sliver of color and strangeness. When had anything unexpected last happened to me? I looked at myself in the small, cracked mirror in my bathroom. I saw the tired lines around my eyes, the faint coffee stain on my shirt I hadn't noticed before. I looked like what I was, a man worn down by the daily grind. What could Julian Croft possibly want with me? And then a different thought surfaced. What did I have to lose? My dignity. I'd felt that slipping away for months with every bill I struggled to pay. My safety. The man was a public figure, not some anonymous predator. The worst that could happen was a few hours of awkwardness. The best. I didn't even know what the best could be. But it was better than sitting here alone, listening to the radiator hiss. At 6:45, I found myself standing on a quiet, tree-lined street in the city's historic district. The address on the card belonged to a magnificent 3-story brownstone, set back from the sidewalk behind a wrought iron fence. It wasn't a gaudy, new-money mansion. It was old, solid, and elegant, the brickwork glowing warmly under the light of a gas lamp. It radiated a sense of history and permanence. It felt like a fortress against the cold, messy world. My heart was pounding. This was insane. I almost turned around and walked away 6 times. But I forced my feet to move, up the stone steps, to the heavy oak door. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. What was I doing here? Before I could lose my nerve, the door swung open. Julian Croft stood there. He had changed out of his wool coat and was wearing a simple gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked comfortable, relaxed. He wasn't smiling, exactly, but the serious set of his face had softened. "Leo," he said. My name on his lips sounded solid, real. "You came. I'm glad." He stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in. You're right on time." I stepped inside, and the warmth of the house enveloped me. The air smelled of old wood, beeswax, and paper. The entryway was paneled in dark, gleaming mahogany, and a grand staircase swept upwards into the shadows. To my left, through a wide archway, I could see a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with books, leather armchairs, a fireplace with a low, crackling fire. It wasn't a showpiece. It was a room that was lived in, loved. It was quiet, peaceful. It felt like a sanctuary. "Can I take your coat?" he asked. I shrugged out of my worn jacket, suddenly self-conscious of its frayed cuffs in this magnificent hall. He took it from me without a glance at its condition and hung it in a closet. He treated it as if it were a coat as fine as his own. The small, simple act of respect did more to put me at ease than any words could have. "The game's on in here," he said, gesturing towards a room on the right. "Can I get you something to drink? Beer? Whiskey? A beer would be great. Thank you," I managed to say. The den was as comfortable and understated as the library. A large, plush sofa faced a massive television screen, which was currently dark. The walls were painted a deep, calming blue and hung with what looked like original abstract art. There was nothing ostentatious about the room. It was just perfect. Every piece of furniture, every lamp, every object seemed to be exactly where it was supposed to be. It was the home of a man with impeccable taste and the money to indulge it. He returned with 2 bottles of a local craft beer, handing one to me. Our fingers brushed as I took it. A tiny, fleeting spark of warmth that shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back quickly. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he gave no sign. He just sat down on one end of the sofa, leaving a respectable distance between us, and picked up the remote. "I hope you don't mind," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "I'm not much for small talk during a game." Relief washed over me. "Neither am I," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. The thought of having to manufacture conversation with this man had been terrifying me. He gave me a brief, approving nod, and the screen flickered to life. The roar of the crowd filled the room, and the game began. We watched for nearly an hour in a comfortable, companionable silence. He was right. He wasn't a talker during the game. He was an intent observer, his focus absolute. He'd lean forward slightly during a tense play, a muscle tightening in his jaw. He'd let out a quiet sigh of frustration at a missed pass, or give a small, satisfied nod at a good run. He was completely absorbed. I found myself watching him as much as I watched the screen. In his own home, the formidable aura of the CEO was gone. He was just a man, a quiet, serious man watching a football game. The power was still there. It was in the house, in the effortless way he existed within it, but it wasn't a weapon. It was just a fact, like the color of his eyes. During halftime, he stood up. "More beer." "I'm good, thanks," I said. He walked over to a window that overlooked the back garden. "The forecast says snow tonight," he said, his back to me. "A big one," I heard that. I replied, my voice sounding small in the large room. He was quiet for a long moment, just staring out into the darkness. I wondered what he was thinking about. His company? The stock market? Or was he just watching the wind rustle the bare branches of the trees? "Why did you do this?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. It was too blunt, too direct. He turned slowly from the window, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Do what?" "This," I said, gesturing around the room. "Invite me here. Pay for my cable." "I don't understand." He walked back over to the sofa, but didn't sit down. He stood before the fireplace, one hand resting on the marble mantelpiece. The firelight cast flickering shadows across his face. "You looked," he began, then paused, searching for the right word. "Resolute, standing at that counter. You weren't complaining or making a scene. You had made a hard decision, and you were seeing it through. There was a dignity in it. I didn't want to see that decision cost you something that brought you a small measure of connection." I stared at him. He hadn't seen a poor man needing a handout. He had seen dignity. He had seen resolve. He had seen me. The realization was a physical shock, a jolt that went straight to my core. "It's just TV," I mumbled, looking down at my hands. "Sometimes, that's enough," he said quietly. "Sometimes, it's the only window we have." The second half of the game started, and we fell back into our comfortable silence. But something had shifted. The air between us was different now, charged with a new awareness. I was no longer just a random stranger. I was someone he had observed, someone he had formed an opinion about. And he was no longer just a mysterious billionaire. He was a man who understood the value of a window in a quiet room. When the game ended, I knew it was time to go. I stood up, my muscles stiff. "Thank you for having me," I said, the words feeling formal and inadequate. "It was. I appreciate it. I enjoyed the company," he said, and I had the distinct feeling he was telling the truth. He walked me to the door, retrieving my coat from the closet. As I put it on, he spoke again. "There's another game next Sunday. Same time, if you're interested." It wasn't a command. It was a simple offer, with no pressure behind it. An open door. I met his gaze. The cool gray of his eyes seemed warmer now, lit by the soft light of the entryway. "I'd like that," I said. He nodded. "Good. Get home safe, Leo. Watch out for the snow." I walked home under a sky that was beginning to fill with fat, heavy flakes. The cold air felt clean in my lungs. My small, shabby apartment didn't seem quite so bleak when I got back to it. I turned on the television, flipping through the channels he had saved for me. It glowed in the corner, a beacon of warmth and light. But it was no longer my only window. A new one had opened tonight. A strange, unexpected window into the life of a quiet, solitary man who had seen something in me I thought no one else could. The next few days were strange. I felt like I was living a double life. By day, I was the anonymous barista, wiping down counters and forcing smiles for tired commuters. But in the back of my mind, there was the constant, humming presence of Julian Croft. I'd replay our brief conversations, analyze his quiet gestures. The way he'd rested his hand on the mantelpiece, the steady calmness of his gaze. He occupied my thoughts in a way no one had in a very long time. He texted me on Wednesday. A simple message. "Hope your week is going well." It was so normal, so mundane, it was almost jarring coming from him. I stared at the screen for a full 10 minutes before typing a reply. "It's going okay. Yours?" The small talk felt stilted and awkward via text, but it was a connection. A thin, digital thread. He wrote back almost immediately. "Busy, but looking forward to Sunday." That was it. But it was enough. It was a confirmation. Sunday wasn't a mirage. It was real. That Sunday, I walked to his brownstone with a knot of nervous energy in my stomach. Was the first time a fluke? A whim he now regretted? But he opened the door just as he had before, with that same quiet welcome in his eyes. This time, he'd ordered pizza. 2 large boxes sat on the coffee table. "I figured this was more appropriate for game day than anything I could cook," he said with a hint of dry humor. The gesture was so disarmingly normal. A billionaire eating pizza out of a cardboard box. It chipped away another piece of the intimidating facade. We ate and watched the game, falling into the same easy silence as before. But this time, it felt less like the silence of strangers and more like the comfortable quiet of 2 people who are beginning to understand each other. Over the next few weeks, this became our routine. Sunday games at his house. Sometimes we'd talk a little more during the commercials. I learned he'd grown up in a small town upstate, that he'd taught himself to code in his parents' garage. He learned that I had moved to the city for art school, but had to drop out when my money ran out. We exchanged small, careful pieces of our lives, like 2 cautious animals inching closer. The physical space between us on the sofa seemed to shrink with each visit, though we never touched. But I was acutely aware of him. The scent of his cologne, a subtle, clean scent of sandalwood and leather. The way the light from the television would catch the silver at his temples. The low, rumbling sound of his voice when he'd make a quiet observation about a play. My senses were dialed into him, every detail cataloged and stored away. One Sunday in late January, the forecast was for a major blizzard. The city was shutting down in anticipation. My boss at the coffee shop had told everyone not to even try to come in the next day. I was almost going to text Julian to cancel, assuming he wouldn't want to be bothered, but he texted me first. "Game is still on. Roads will be bad later. You're welcome to stay in the guest room if you'd like. It's warm, and I have plenty of food." The offer was practical, sensible, and yet it sent a jolt of something electric through me. To stay the night. To be in his house not just as a visitor for a few hours, but to actually sleep under his roof. It felt like a significant step, a crossing of some invisible boundary. I packed a small bag, a change of clothes, my toothbrush, my sketchbook, and walked to his house as the first flakes began to fall. The city was growing quiet, the usual traffic noise muffled by the thickening snow. "Good. You made it," he said, taking my bag as I stepped inside. "It's getting bad out there." The house felt even more like a sanctuary now, a warm, solid fortress against the storm raging outside. The wind howled, rattling the old windows, but inside, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of the game. After the game was over, the silence felt different. We weren't leaving. There was no ticking clock, no journey home to prepare for. The night stretched out before us. "I was thinking of opening a bottle of wine," he said, breaking the quiet. "Would you join me?" "I'd like that," I said. He disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. He poured, his movements economical and precise. He handed a glass to me, And this time, as our fingers brushed, neither of us pulled away immediately. His skin was warm. The contact lasted only a second longer than necessary, but it was enough. A silent acknowledgement of the changing dynamic between us. We sat in the library, in the big leather armchairs in front of the fire. The storm was a wild thing outside, a blizzard in full force, but in here, we were safe and warm. "Tell me about your art," he said, his voice soft in the quiet room. No one had asked me about my art in years. I'd almost forgotten how to talk about it. But something about the moment, the wine, the fire, the genuine interest in his eyes, made it easy. I told him about my love of charcoal, of capturing faces and the stories they told. I told him about the frustration of not having the time or the space to create. He listened. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just listened, his gray eyes fixed on my face, nodding occasionally. He made me feel like what I had to say was important. "I'd like to see your work sometime," he said when I was finished. "It's not very good," I said automatically, the old insecurity rising up. "I'll be the judge of that," he replied, his tone gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. Later, he showed me to the guest room. It was on the second floor, a beautiful, simple room with a four-poster bed and its own fireplace. It was larger than my entire apartment. "The bathroom is through there," he said, pointing to a door. "Let me know if you need anything." "Anything at all, thank you, Julian," I said, the name feeling natural on my tongue for the first time. "For everything." He paused in the doorway, his hand on the frame. He looked at me, a long, searching look. "I know this is unconventional, Leo," he said, his voice low. "My position, my life. It complicates things. I hope you know that you are free to say no to me. At any time. My resources are just tools. They shouldn't feel like walls." His vulnerability was breathtaking. The billionaire CEO, the stoic protector, was admitting his own uncertainty. He was worried about how he was perceived, worried that his wealth was a cage, not just for him, but for me. He was naming the power imbalance that had been the unspoken elephant in the room since the day we met, and he was giving me the power to control it. "I know," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've never felt pressured or obligated." A visible wave of relief washed over his features. "Good," he said softly. "That's good to hear." He hesitated for another moment, as if he wanted to say more, but then he just nodded. "Sleep well, Leo." He closed the door, leaving me alone in the quiet, firelit room. I stood there for a long time, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. He wasn't just being kind. He wasn't just lonely. He was being careful with me. And that realization, more than the grand house or the free cable, was the most valuable gift he could have given me. I slept better that night than I had in years, wrapped in the heavy down comforter, the sound of the wind a distant lullaby. I woke to a world transformed. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a thick, pristine blanket of white that muffled all sound. The city was silent. I found Julian in the kitchen, a large, bright room at the back of the house overlooking the snow-covered garden. He was standing at a professional-looking espresso machine, a look of intense concentration on his face. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair slightly rumpled from sleep. He looked younger, more approachable. "Morning," he said, not looking up from his task. "I can make you a latte. If you can tolerate my amateur skills, I think I can manage," I said, a smile playing on my lips. "I have some professional experience," he chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. I forgot. Of course, he stepped aside, gesturing to the machine. "Be my guest." And so I found myself in a billionaire's kitchen, making us both lattes, the movements familiar and comforting. We worked side by side, a comfortable domesticity settling over us. He made toast and scrambled eggs. We ate at a small wooden table in a sunny breakfast nook, the snow outside sparkling in the morning light. "The whole city is shut down," he said, looking at his phone. "Looks like we're snowed in for another day at least." The thought of another day here, in this warm, quiet house with this quiet, careful man, didn't fill me with anxiety. It filled me with a calm, hopeful warmth. We spent the day in a state of peaceful isolation. We shoveled a path from the back door to the woodpile, our breath pluming in the cold, crisp air. We worked together, falling into an easy rhythm, the shared physical task creating a new kind of bond between us. Later, we sat by the fire and read, him a dense-looking history book, Me my own sketchbook, which I had finally felt brave enough to take out. I didn't draw him, not yet. I drew the room. The way the firelight fell on the leather chairs, the view of the snowy garden through the window. I felt the old creative spark returning, fanned into life by the peace and safety of this house. That evening, as we sat in the library again, the silence felt different. It was no longer just comfortable, it was charged, full of all the things we hadn't said. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, a low hum of electricity between us. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was falling for him. It was terrifying. He was from a different world, a different generation. Our lives were impossibly different. But the man himself, the quiet, steady, perceptive man who saw dignity in a stranger and worried about the weight of his own wealth, I was falling for him. He must have sensed the shift in me. He put his book down and looked at me, his gray eyes searching my face. "You've been quiet tonight," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation, an opening. I took a deep breath. The silence has become difficult, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. "For me as well," he confessed. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped between his knees. The firelight carved his handsome face into planes of light and shadow. "Leo," he said, his voice low and steady, a rock in the churning sea of my emotions. "What is it you want?" The question hung in the air between us. It was direct, honest. He wasn't making assumptions. He wasn't pushing. He was asking. He was giving me all the power. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, wild bird. This was it. The precipice. The moment where I could retreat back into the safety of our carefully constructed friendship, where I could take a leap of faith into the terrifying, beautiful unknown. I thought of my cold, empty apartment. I thought of the lonely nights with only the television for company. I thought of the blank pages in my sketchbook. And then I thought of this house, this fire, this man, this feeling of being seen, of being safe, of being home. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I let him see everything I was feeling. The fear, the yearning, the hope. "I want this," I said, my voice shaking slightly as I gestured to the space between us, to the quiet room, to this fragile, powerful connection we had built. "I want to know you. Not your company, not your house. You." But I was afraid a profound change came over his face. The last vestiges of the stoic, guarded CEO melted away, replaced by a look of such raw, open tenderness it made my breath catch in my throat. "I feel the same," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I think I have from the moment you stood at that counter, trying to hold on to your dignity while giving something up. I wasn't interested in your poverty, Leo. I was interested in your strength." He stood up, his movements fluid and deliberate, and crossed the space between us. He stopped in front of my armchair, his presence a warm, solid weight in the room. He didn't loom over me. He just stood there, waiting. He extended his hand. My own hand was trembling as I placed it in his. His fingers closed around mine, strong and sure. He gently pulled me to my feet, until we were standing face to face, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't rush. He just looked at me, his gray eyes searching mine, giving me every possible chance to pull away, to say no. In his gaze, I saw the same fear and hope that was in my own heart. Then, slowly, he leaned in and his lips met mine. It wasn't a kiss of desperate, pent-up passion. It was a kiss of arrival. It was soft and sure and deeply, profoundly reassuring. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of wine and wood smoke and a quiet, patient yearning. It felt right. More right than anything had felt in a very long time. It was unforced. It was mutual. It was a promise. When he pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. Our fingers were still laced together between us. I could feel his breath, warm against my cheek. I could feel the steady, solid beat of his heart. "Leo," he whispered, my name a prayer against my skin. I didn't need to say anything. I just squeezed his hand, and I knew he understood. The storm could rage outside. The world with all its complications and differences could wait. In this moment, in this quiet, firelit room, we had found our own shelter. We had found each other. I stayed the night again, but this time I didn't sleep in the guest room. I slept in his bed, a vast and comfortable sea of soft linens, with his arm wrapped securely around me. I slept soundly, deeply, anchored by his solid presence beside me. But when I woke in the gray light of dawn, a sliver of my old anxiety crept in. The room was magnificent, the morning light filtering through tall, elegant windows. Julian was still asleep, his face relaxed and peaceful. He looked vulnerable, human, but the sheer scale of his life was all around me. The priceless art on the walls, the antique furniture, the palpable silence of a house so large and well-built you couldn't hear the city waking up outside. The reality of our different worlds came rushing back, sharp and sobering. What now? Was I his project? A curiosity? A temporary diversion from his real life of board meetings and stock portfolios? The fear of dependency, of being seen as nothing more than a kept boy, was a cold knot in my stomach. He stirred beside me, his gray eyes slowly opening. He looked at me, and a soft, genuine smile touched his lips. It was the first time I had seen him truly smile, and it transformed his face, erasing years of seriousness. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, but my voice was tight. His smile faded as he registered my expression. His perception was as sharp as ever. He propped himself up on one elbow, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it? Are you okay?" I looked away, at the intricate pattern of the plasterwork on the ceiling. "I'm just thinking," I said, "about the reality of this. Of us." He was silent for a moment, letting me gather my thoughts. He didn't push, didn't offer empty reassurances. He waited. "Julian, I can't be a project," I finally managed to say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I can't live in your world. I don't fit. I have my own life, my own pride, I guess. Even if it doesn't look like much from in here." He listened patiently, his gaze never leaving my face. When I was finished, he reached out and gently tilted my chin so I had to look at him. His eyes were clear and serious. "Leo, look at me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I don't want a project. I want a partner. I want you. The man I met at that counter. The artist who sees the world in shades of light and shadow. Your life is not much, it's yours. And I would never, ever try to take that away from you." He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "I've been thinking about this too," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I know the optics are complicated. The last thing I want is for you to feel trapped or dependent on me." He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. "I have an idea," he said, his back to me. "A proposal. And like every proposal I make, you are free to reject it." He turned back to face me. "There's a space above my detached garage. It was originally the chauffeur's quarters a long time ago. It's been renovated since. It's a small studio apartment. One big room, a kitchenette, a bathroom. It has its own entrance from the alley. And it has incredible north-facing light. The kind an artist would appreciate." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I want you to use it. As your studio. A place to work, to create. No rent. No strings attached. It's not a place for you to live, unless you choose to. Your apartment remains your own. Your life remains your own. This, us," he gestured between the bed and where he stood. "We figure this out one day at a time. At your pace. Always at your pace. The studio is just a tool, Leo. Like I said, a resource to help you do the thing you were meant to do. It's not a leash." The offer was breathtaking in its thoughtfulness. He had listened. He had understood my deepest fears without me having to spell them all out. He wasn't offering to solve all my problems with a wave of his checkbook. He was offering me space. He was offering me light. He was offering me the one thing I craved more than anything, the freedom to be myself, but with the support I needed to thrive. He was preserving my independence, my agency, while still bringing me closer into his world. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. "Julian," I started, but my voice broke. He crossed the room in 2 strides and sat on the edge of the bed, taking my hand in his. His thumb stroked the back of my knuckles. "It's just a room, Leo," he said softly. "The rest, we'll build that together. If you wanna, I want to," I whispered. More than anything, a few weeks later, we faced our first real test. Julian had been invited to a gallery opening for a new exhibition at the city's main art museum. He was a major patron of the museum, so his attendance was expected. He asked if I would go with him. As my date, he specified, making it clear. I was terrified. This was his world. A world of tuxedos and champagne, of polite, coded conversations and subtle power plays. I owned one suit, a cheap, ill-fitting thing I'd bought for a wedding 5 years ago. Julian, as always, anticipated my anxiety. "We can go shopping," he suggested, his tone casual. "I need a new shirt anyway." He made it seem like a shared errand, not a charity case. He took me to a quiet, elegant men's clothier downtown. He didn't steer me towards the most expensive racks. He just watched as I browsed, offering quiet opinions when I asked. He had an incredible eye for what would suit me. We found a beautiful dark blue suit that fit me perfectly. When I went to pay, Julian simply handed his card to the clerk. "A gift," he said, before I could protest. "Let me have this, Leo. I want to see you in it." His tone was so full of sincere warmth, it was impossible to argue. The night of the gallery opening, I felt like an imposter. Standing in front of the mirror in Julian's guest room, the suit felt like a costume. But when Julian came in, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his eyes lit up. "You look incredible," he said, his voice low and appreciative. He straightened my tie, his fingers warm against my neck. "Ready as I'll ever be," I said, my heart pounding. He smiled. "Just stay close to me," he said. "And remember, you're the only person in that room I actually want to talk to." The gallery was a swirling sea of wealth and influence. I recognized faces from the society pages, politicians, business leaders. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on us as we walked in, Julian's hand resting lightly on the small of my back. His presence was a warm, steadying anchor. For a while, it went well. Julian introduced me simply as my partner, Leo, his tone leaving no room for questions. Most people were polite, if a little cool. But then a man I recognized as a real estate developer, a slick, reptilian type named Marcus Thorne, cornered us near the bar. "Julian, good to see you," Thorne said, his eyes flicking over me with a dismissive, appraising glance. He turned his smarmy smile on me. "And you must be the new protege." Julian always did have a soft spot for struggling artists. The implication was clear, the insult dripping with condescension. He was calling me a gold digger, a charity case, in the most public way possible. A hot, shameful flush crept up my neck. I froze, all my old insecurities rushing to the surface. I felt small, poor, and out of place. Before I could even stammer a response, Julian's hand tightened ever so slightly on my back. His posture didn't change, his expression remained placid, but a sudden coldness entered his eyes. "Marcus," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Leo is not my protege. He is my partner. And more importantly, he is a far better man than you will ever be. I'd appreciate it if you showed him the same respect you pretend to show me." The words were delivered without heat, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. Thorne's smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned shock. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish. Julian didn't wait for a reply. He put his arm around my shoulders and steered me away, leaving Thorne standing there, red-faced and humiliated. We walked to a quieter corner of the gallery, near a large abstract painting. My heart was still racing. "Are you all right?" Julian asked, his voice full of concern. I nodded, taking a shaky breath. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't have to do that." He turned to face me, taking both of my hands in his. "Yes, I did," he said fiercely. "I will not stand by and let anyone disrespect you, Leo. Not ever. We are in this together. That means I have your back." Always looking into his steady, determined eyes, I believed him. He hadn't been embarrassed by me or by the situation. He had been protective. He hadn't caused a scene, but he had drawn a clear, uncrossable line in the sand. He had defended my honor, my dignity, without ever making me feel weak or helpless. He had simply stood with me. We had navigated the moment together, as partners. The studio above the garage became my sanctuary. Julian was true to his word. He gave me a key and left me alone. It was my space. The light was, as he'd promised, incredible. I spent hours there, losing myself in the familiar scent of charcoal and paper. The blank pages in my sketchbook began to fill up. I drew the view from the window, the way the light changed over the course of the day. I drew the objects in Julian's house, his reading glasses on a book, a favorite coffee mug. And finally, I drew him. I drew him sitting in his armchair by the fire, his face thoughtful and serious. I drew him at the kitchen counter, a rare smile on his face as he concentrated on some culinary task. I drew the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes. My art, which had been dormant for so long, came pouring out of me, fueled by this new, quiet happiness. Our life together found its own rhythm. It was a blend of our two worlds. Some nights we would stay at his grand house, cooking dinner together and talking late into the night. Other nights, I would go back to my own small apartment, treasuring the solitude and independence it represented. Julian never questioned it. He understood my need for my own space. Sometimes he would even come to my place, folding his large frame onto my lumpy sofa, and we would order cheap takeout and watch a movie on my small television. He never once complained or made me feel like my home was inadequate. He just seemed happy to be with me, wherever we were. One Saturday morning, he came up to the studio to see my work. I was nervous, but I taped a dozen of my new charcoal portraits to the wall for him to see. He walked along the wall slowly, studying each one in silence. He spent the longest time in front of a portrait I had done of him, a close-up of his face, where I had tried to capture the complex mix of strength, weariness, and gentle kindness in his expression. "Leo," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "These are extraordinary. The way you see things. The way you see me." He turned to me, his gray eyes shining. "This is who you are. This is what you were meant to do." In that moment, I felt a sense of rightness, of purpose, that I hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just my partner, my lover. He was my greatest champion. He saw the best version of me and held it up for me to see as well. "We need to talk about the future," he said, his tone shifting from awe to something more practical. "Okay," I said, my heart giving a little lurch. "I want more of this," he said. "More of us. But I want to do it right. I want to build a life with you, Leo. A real life. And that means being honest about the practicalities." He looked around the studio. "I want you to be able to do this full time. To not have to worry about the coffee shop, about making rent. I want to support you. But I need to know that you see that as support, not control." "I do," I said, my voice firm. "Julian, you've never tried to control me. You've only ever tried to set me free." We decided on a plan. I would quit my job at the daily grind at the end of the month. He would set up a separate bank account for me, with a monthly stipend, enough to cover my apartment rent, bills, and art supplies. It wasn't an extravagant amount. It was a practical, sensible fund that gave me security without making me feel like a dependent. It was a salary for my new job, being an artist. My work was my own. If I sold any pieces, the money was mine. The boundaries were clear, discussed, and agreed upon. We were making conscious, deliberate choices together. The next morning, I woke up in Julian's bed to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen to find him standing at the stove, making omelets. The sun was streaming through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He was humming softly to himself, a low, tuneless sound of pure contentment. He looked up as I entered, and his face broke into that rare, beautiful smile. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's ready." I poured myself a mug and leaned against the counter, just watching him. The scene was so simple, so domestic. There was no tension, no uncertainty. The grand, intimidating house no longer felt like his house. It felt like our home. This quiet, comfortable intimacy, this shared, mundane moment. This was more precious than all the art and antiques in the world. This was real. He slid a perfectly made omelet onto a plate and handed it to me. "Eat up," he said. "We have a lot to plan." I looked at him, this incredible, steady, thoughtful man who had walked into my life and turned it upside down in the quietest way possible. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It had started with a bill I couldn't pay, with an act of surrender. I had walked into that Vivid Link office to cut a cord, to shrink my world down to a manageable, colorless size. Instead, Julian Croft had handed me a thread to a new life, a vibrant and expansive one I never could have imagined. The difference in our ages, in our bank accounts, still existed. They were facts, but they were no longer a source of fear or a barrier between us. They were simply part of the context of our story, the unlikely circumstances that had brought us together. He had used his resources not to buy me or own me, but to create a safe space where I could finally become the person I was always meant to be. And I, in turn, had given him something he couldn't buy, a window into a world of genuine, unguarded emotion. A quiet partnership, built not on power, but on mutual care, respect, and a deep, abiding love. He caught me watching him, a questioning look in his eyes. I just smiled. I felt steady. I felt hopeful. I felt seen. I was no longer isolated in my small, third-floor walk-up. I was here. I was home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow-burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.